Okay. Oh, there we go.
Perfect.
We are recording.
Alrighty. So hi everybody, and welcome to our info night. This month we will be focusing on schizophrenic spectrum and dissociative disorders. Before I get going, I just want to clear up a couple of little terminology things. First of all, I myself don't have schizophrenia, and I can only talk about so much tonight without stepping on toes and sounding like a jerk. And second of all, when I use words like delusion, for example, I'm not intending to cast any judgments of value. I'm just using the medical terminology referring to the set of symptoms. Additionally, with the way we use positive and negative in medicine, and particularly psychology, we don't use them like we would in colloquial speech. They're more mathematical and discuss the addition or subtraction of things already present. You're going to get a better example of this in a couple of minutes here. So, good, I can work this properly. First, I want to talk about schizophrenia, since a lot of the rest of my talk relies on this one disorder. There are three categories of symptoms associated with schizophrenia. The first is delusions as well as racing thoughts. So they're called positive symptoms because they're the addition of things that aren't previously present in like statistically normative psychology. Negative symptoms include things like apathy, lack of emotion, poor social functioning, and flat affect. And flat affect is the lack of outward emotional expression. So they'll look very just like what you see is what you get, kind of. And then the cognitive symptoms include disorganized thoughts, attention problems, difficulty following instructions, and memory problems. So there are a few different subtypes of schizophrenia as well, as you can see here. Paranoid schizophrenia comes with feelings of extreme suspicion, persecution, or grandiosity. That can also be a combination of the three. That's kind of the stereotypical presentation, though it isn't necessarily the most common. Disorganized schizophrenia is characterized by incoherent thoughts, but they're not necessarily delusional thoughts. They just don't make any sense. Like when you put the words together, they just don't make English sentences syntax-wise. Catatonic schizophrenia is where the person is in deep withdrawal. They show negative affect and isolation, as well as marked psychomotor disturbances. So this may end up in them just kind of sitting there, withdrawing, not engaging with the world, not responding to external stimuli. Residual schizophrenia can happen after the positive symptoms are gone and the negative symptoms remain. So there's a very like deep depression, deep withdrawal, flat affect. And then finally, schizoaffective disorders, where the person has symptoms of both schizophrenia and a major mood disorder such as depression. Many of these subtypes could also be considered different disorders. So it's generally relying on the different length and presentation of symptoms that'll help you diagnostically. There are a vast range of treatments available for schizophrenia, seemingly the most common of which that I've encountered in my research is antipsychotic medications. There are a few different types of these. Each of them have different side effects. I myself am not a pharmacist, so I'm not comfortable telling you about all the different types of medications, but there's a ton out there if you're interested in looking into it, and I can point you to more resources if you're interested. Cognitive behavioral therapy and behavioral skills training are both very prevalent as well. And there's also a wide range of support systems for the families of people affected by schizophrenia. There have been some exciting advances in neurotechnology that allow exciting things like transcranial magnetic stimulation and transcranial direct current therapy to be possible, both of which have proven to be helpful already in treating neurological conditions such as depression or Parkinson's disease. TMS involves use of a very strong electromagnet over the area of the cortical brain impacted, and it briefly alters the electrical signal of the brain and helps in producing a therapeutic effect. If you take brain and behavior at UFC, highly recommend. Spanswick was an excellent prof. You're going to be shown a few videos of TMS in action. If you position it over Broca's area in the brain, it actually shuts off your ability to speak while the magnet's activated, and then it goes right back to normal. It's very fascinating. TDCT is very similar, but electrodes are placed on the scalp and then strategically stimulated. So very similar ideas, just a different way in which it's carried out. Electroconvulsive therapy has also been used in the past to treat schizophrenia, often improperly, historically resulting in great harm. ECT is done under general anesthesia, and it creates a seizure that is allegedly controlled and only affects a certain area of the brain. Now, in the past, ECT was used very poorly and misused in a lot of cases, resulting in like a lot of damage. But recently there's been a ton more research done into neurology. There's way more controls, and it's much safer procedure to undergo these days. Now, there are a few theories about what causes schizophrenia. There does seem to be some hereditary link, though to my understanding, the exact degree of heredity is unknown. There are also some environmental factors involved, such as abuse and substance use. Typically, if you have a family history of schizophrenia, you should avoid marijuana. I don't like telling people what to do, but it's going to mess with your brain. Since there have been reports of people getting triggered into schizophrenia and psychosis by starting to use marijuana. So that's just something to talk to your doctor about. And like, you should be careful with mood altering substances in general. Brain structure and function also plays a key role, specifically with how certain neurotransmitters are produced and used, though the research into this area is still ongoing. And as well as the struggles people with schizophrenia face trying to manage their symptoms, which can be quite scary and overwhelming, they also face massive amounts of stigma. People with schizophrenia often struggle with keeping jobs, which results in a huge number of people with schizophrenia being homeless and unable to access treatment. There's also a long history of people with schizophrenia being institutionalized, where they're often abused and faced experimental medical treatments such as uncontrolled ECT and lobotomies, and that left people fundamentally altered. I won't go into institutions tonight since I don't want to derail myself too much, but if you have more questions about them, feel free to email me and I'll find you some more information on the subject. So moving on to schizophrenic spectrum disorders now. There are three I want to touch on here. The first is delusional disorder. This disorder is characterized almost wholly by delusions. Any hallucinations with this one are minor. It also tends to occur in episodes. The next is brief psychotic disorder, which almost presents like a short little episode of schizophrenia. It's under 6 months in duration. After that, it's no longer considered brief psychotic disorder. That's a different diagnostic category. And then finally, catatonia includes stupor, catalepsy, which is a trance or a seizure where the person has minimal awareness of their surroundings and has like a very rigid hold to their body. A sort of resistance to being moved called waxy flexibility. Mutism, negativism, which is like chronic clinical pessimism, and posturing their body in a certain way and keeping it there, stereotypy or copying in their mannerisms, agitation, grimacing, echolalia, and echopraxia. These disorders can present very similarly to schizophrenia, but the exact type and duration of symptoms is critical. So tonight I do also want to talk about a couple of dissociative disorders, since these can also be extremely stigmatized. Dissociative identity disorder, or DID, is one of the most stigmatized disorders and historically has been treated very badly by media presentations. Symptoms include the presence of 2 or more distinct identities, usually called alters, recurrent memory gaps, loss of important personal information, and the repression of traumatic events. There are a number of factors to consider with DID, especially since it's such a complex disorder. People with DID often refer to themselves as systems, since they're a conglomerate of different alters sharing their host body. DID tends to be comorbid with other things like depression, anxiety, self-harm, and other risk-taking behaviors, and substance abuse problems. Excuse me. It often forms as a result of trauma. Like, I think I saw a stat saying 99% of the time, but it is more often than not. It can present without trauma, however. Many types of alters can form with different roles in the system, like caregivers, protectors, and even alters based on characters, which are called fictives, or real people, which are called factives. Each type of alter fulfills a specific purpose in the system, and I won't go too far into detail tonight because I'm not an expert. But if you have questions, please shoot me an email, and I'll try to find more sources to share with you. And the last disorder form I want to talk about tonight is depersonalization derealization disorder. Depersonalization includes feelings of detachment from the body, a diminished sense of personal agency, which people have reported as feeling robotic or as though they're trying to work through a fog, an out-of-body sensation, and distortions in how time is experienced. By contrast, derealization disorder includes feelings of detachment from the world, moving through life as though in a dreamlike state, seeing things as much bigger or smaller than they are, or much closer or further, auditory distortions, and marked distress about their day-to-day functioning. Now, these two disorders sound incredibly similar, but the way I remember it is that depersonalization includes the word person, so you're outside of your personal body, whereas derealization, it feels like the world is warped. And don't be alarmed if any of this sounds familiar. Around 50% of adults have experienced these things at some point. It becomes a disorder when it's chronic or repetitive or has an impact on your day-to-day functioning. Now, there's an insane amount of stigma attached to DID in particular, as shown in movies like Split or the classic Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde kind of idea. This makes it so hard for people with DID to open up about their struggles, and even harder to want to reach out for help managing their DID. Like with schizophrenia, there's also a long history of people with DID being institutionalized, and it has been a misunderstood condition for a very long time. There are no established medication-based treatments for DID that I'm aware of, so the majority of treatments include psychotherapy. This lack of medication available kind of shows us that this condition is still not neurologically understood, and that there's more research that could be done to help people with DID manage their mental health. As always, we need to turn to the lived experiences of people with DID to figure out how we can support them best. And I don't have a guest speaker lined up for tonight, unfortunately. So I'm going to direct you to these videos instead. You can either scan them with your camera with the QR code, or I've included the links under each of the QR codes. So the first three are TED Talks done by people with schizophrenia. The fourth is a documentary about somebody with DID, and the fifth is a therapist talking about depersonalization, derealization disorder. They're all super interesting, and they're as close to Own Voices content as I could find for you tonight. I highly recommend you check out the TED Talks. They're super well done. That one in the middle in particular, I think, is my favorite one there. Now, tonight, the organization we'll be supporting this month is the Schizophrenia Society of Alberta, and that provides community support, outreach and education, supportive living, and employment opportunities to people with schizophrenia. I absolutely love the work they do, and I'm thrilled that we're going to be supporting them this period. So many of the issues people with schizophrenia face are due to the lack of employment and housing. So I think it's absolutely critical to support organizations who want to help correct this. And just stay tuned for more excuse me, words are hard. Stay tuned for more fundraising information as we release it. Now it's time to vote on the topics for November. Super excited about this. Our options are Crohn's and colitis, epilepsy, and Alzheimer's. So you can either scan the QR code below or follow the link below it to get to the survey. I'm gonna leave this here for a sec to give you a chance. This video is also going to be posted at some point soon, so don't be alarmed if I move on before you get a chance to scan it. I'm excited to see what people are going to pick, because no matter what, it's going to be a very interesting presentation next time. And there are a fair few awareness days in November. It's a good month to be aware. I won't read the whole list, but you can take a look here. And as always, it's important to be aware of health and disability related issues, regardless of what day or month it is. So not only is it Movember, which is in support of men's health, specifically due to prostate cancer, I think. I'm not 100% sure on that. It's also Lung Cancer Awareness Month, Crohn's and Colitis Awareness Month, Fall Prevention Month, which is super, super important if you have older relatives, and it's COPD Awareness Month. Our next info night will be November 19th. I do hope I got the date right. Somebody please correct me if I'm wrong there. Thank you so much for coming tonight. We really appreciate your support of IDEAA and of our cause.
Also, there should be another, like for Lyme disease, I uploaded a fundraising video. I plan to do the same for schizophrenia, where if you missed this info night, it'll be uploaded on the website, but also I'll be giving a brief recap of it, as well as going into depth as to what the specific charity does. So you can look out for that at some point. An email will be sent. And yeah.
Awesome. Thanks for adding that. All right. If anybody has any questions, I can either do my best to answer them now, or I can look for sources to point you towards.
I have a question.
Yeah, go ahead.
So just of what you know, is it hard for people with schizophrenia and DID to get a diagnosis?
As far as I'm aware, yes. I saw a stat earlier today saying that people with DID are often in the psychological health system for around 7 years before they get a diagnosis. Either they're diagnosed with something else beforehand or they're misdiagnosed as something like a depression or bipolar disorder when in fact it's DID. But DID is also very comorbid with other things. Schizophrenia is a little bit easier because it involves the presence of positive symptoms, but I'm not entirely sure on the comparative numbers there.
Okay, thank you.
No problem.
Actually, Kaylee, I have a question for
Yeah.
you. So what was like the most interesting thing that you found out? Because I feel like you probably have some knowledge about
I
schizophrenia.
have to pick one. I can't just say
guess
that it's
so.
all interesting.
I'm sorry to make it hard for you, but yes. Yeah,
Oh.
like what was the thing that most stood out to you? Or like something that you didn't really learn in psych?
So I didn't learn most of this in psych. I just have a long-standing interest in mental health and wellness. It's because it's very important to me. So I just like, this is my second time that I've read the DSM. Don't recommend it. It's like 1,000 pages. It's interesting. It's clinically interesting, but the language is so dry and medical model based. But what I've found interesting is the support online that people with these disorders give each other is astronomical. Like, it's fantastic. I love seeing the people supporting each other. I did some digging around on the schizophrenia subreddit where people with schizophrenia just talk about their experiences, diagnosis, maybe some of the issues they're facing. And I'm interested in the range of positive symptoms people experience. Like, it's not all the government's after me. It's not all somebody's trying to talk to me. Like, there's a vast, vast range of positive symptoms. It's really interesting.
Yeah, because that's usually what I hear. Like, I remember in psych, they would show examples of videos of people with schizophrenia. And usually it would be like someone who'd be like, oh my gosh, they're after me.
Yeah.
Like, it'd be very extreme. They never really showed, I don't know. I feel like that's definitely not the common thing that happens with people with schizophrenia. So
No, it's just the most,
that.
it's like just the most prevalent media presentation. And the media has really done people dirty here. Like, people with DID aren't dangerous. Their brain just functions in a different way. Like the movie Split, I haven't even watched it because the idea of that stereotyping makes me so mad.
Yeah.
It's
Well,
pretty
I found it
extreme.
oh, I'm sorry.
Oh, no. Go ahead, John.
It's, you know, it's interesting. Well, interesting and terrible that
Mhm.
how poorly like schizophrenia is understood. Before your, you know, your presentation, I didn't know schizophrenia was so like diverse in the way it's classified and diagnosed and everything. I just, you know, people don't really talk about it very much as
No.
you know, nearly as much as they should.
It freaks people out when they're confronted with something different than they're used to. And it really hinders a lot of learning and progress. I feel
Right.
like people just need to be more comfortable with the idea that not everybody has the same experiences moving through the day-to-day world, you know?
Right.
That's definitely interesting. And a huge portion of the homeless population tends to be diagnosed with schizophrenia just because it's so hard to keep a job, to keep their home, and then they're so hugely stigmatized that they won't get hired. Like, it's such a huge
Right.
problem.
Actually, I have another question. I don't know if
Yeah.
you know this, but like, did you find any differences in like how the US and Canada, like the healthcare
Oh,
system deals with it?
you know, I didn't come across anything like that. I'd imagine that there are differences just due to the different natures of our healthcare systems. And I hear more horror stories coming out of modern American institutions than I do out of modern Canadian institutions, but I don't have any numbers to back that up.
Could also be just because larger population down there. So just because you
Exactly.
don't hear as much about Canada doesn't mean it's necessarily better.
Yeah. And just like
I
sheer
wouldn't
volume,
imagine
like
it
their
is.
system might be overloaded.
That's true.
Yes, so many negative stigmas. It drives me absolutely batty. Like, what's the point of being mean to people about something they can't control? I don't understand it.
Especially since, you know, it can be almost used as a slur for some people, which is
It literally
disgusting.
is a
Like,
slur.
yeah,
Yeah,
it is,
it's
yeah.
on a scale for sure.
Yeah,
It's
it's
all on
terrible.
scale. Like the term schizo is literally a slur. Like there's no reason for these people to be treated so badly for something they can't control.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, it's also crazy how you talk about they're always stigmatized as being so violent. I was thinking, I've noticed for DID in movies, it's always like, oh, the second personality has killed someone. And that's
Yeah.
like the whole purpose of them having it.
Yeah, it's not a thing. Like, that's
Why is the
ridiculous,
person with
isn't it?
DID always, why is one of the alters always homicidal? Like that's not how that works in real life. I think it's something around 1% of the population has DID. And like
Well,
clearly statistically speaking, that's not how that works in terms of the crime rates and everything.
that's the thing. I'm sure the people who made that movie, didn't think even a little bit as to the actual impact it could have. They just thought, oh, this is a good
Mm-mm.
idea. It's not a good idea. That's really a bad idea.
It's a terrible idea. And
Yeah.
oh yes, question. Yeah. Ooh, yes, very interesting question. So there's a huge social model movement within the mental health communities. And I think it honestly depends on who your medical provider is, where you go, what area of the world you're in, because people have such different views on disability and mental illness, especially mental illness, because it deals with the brain. It just, I think it is still very medical, but there is definitely a greater shift towards a more social model of thinking. See that we have less than a minute left here. Do we know how to extend that?
I don't actually. What we could
I
do
tried-
is, oh, sorry.
I was just saying, I tried looking it up. I think we can leave and then rejoin using the same link and it'll restart the meeting time again if we want to
Right.
try that.
Well, what we could do is there anyone who has any outstanding questions?
Because you can rejoin us if you have more questions, if it kicks us out.
Right. The four of us are planning on rejoining right after right after it finishes. So if you have some more questions, then feel free to rejoin with using the same
Absolutely.
link on the website.
Happy to try and answer it for you.
It doesn't say when we'll be kicked off. So if it gets kicked off
Ominous.
now, then everyone, thank you so much for coming. We really appreciate it.
Really appreciate it.
Yeah.
So glad to see so many people here tonight.
Yeah, that's great.
Thanks, guys. I guess we'll wait and see what happens.
Yeah.
Anyone who doesn't have any questions or anything is totally free to leave if they'd like. Otherwise,
Yeah.
rejoin
Otherwise-
after it kicks us all out, and then
If it kicks us out.
I think it will. I've had it kick us out
Probably
before.
does.
Cool.
This happened
It's-
over family Thanksgiving and it just cut
Oh,
off
no.
right in the middle of the conversation with no
Yeah.
warning. So
Well, it says less than a minute. It said less than a minute for a long time now.
Yeah. Awesome. Thanks
the world's
everyone for
longest
coming.
minute.
Super excited to share what I've learned with y'all.
Thanks for putting that together.